So, Professor Sherman, we're here at the Royal Society at the Conference of Society of Evidence-Based Policing. Why are we here? What are we hearing today?
We're here because the Queen of Sweden delivered the Stockholm Prize in Criminology to Tom Tyler and Gary Lafree, two leading scholars on procedural justice and legitimacy. And they have so much to say that's directly relevant to police practice and is based on evidence that they've been dazzling us all morning with their presentations, along with new evidence on the effectiveness of stop and search to prevent knife crime and homicide in London, presented by Professor Alex Piquero, who's the former director of the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics.
Excellent. Can you give us some of the highlights of what we've already? It's only lunchtime, so we're only halfway through, but what have we heard so far?
Well, I began by showing the incredible concentration of weapons harm in only about 3% of London, and the way in which stop and search can be justified under procedural justice principles, that this is a very dangerous place, and I'm here for your protection and for the protection of people in this area at this time, where it's 20 times more likely that you'll suffer weapons harm than in the rest of London. And so that whole idea of trustworthy motives, which is core to procedural justice, corresponds with this concentration of crime in only a few places. Implication meaning you shouldn't be doing stop and search where it's not elevated. That's the argument that Malcolm Gladwell had made. Nobody's going to ban the use of stop and search, but it's really a question of allocating scarce resources and whether we get better return on police time if they're concentrating on the places that have the most weapons crime. So that's the starting point. Then Alex Piquero showed even if you don't pay attention to precise locations, in general across the last 15 years, London had fewer murders and fewer knife injuries when there were more stop and search. And he went through the statistical tests, 3 or 4 different ways to look at it, and comes up with the same result. Then Tom Tyler presented his framework of the 4 pillars of procedural justice, of neutrality, respect, voice or listening to people, and most important perhaps the idea of these trustworthy motives. He gave us many good examples, reported on some of the tests of his training, training based on his procedural justice theory and how it's not only improved the conduct of the police around procedural justice principles, but it's helped to reduce crime in the areas in which they police in that way. And then we just heard from Gary Lafree that with the murder of Freddie Gray, who was arrested for carrying a knife in Baltimore, and in 2015 was killed by putting him in the back of a police van and having him bounce around with the van going on sudden braking. He broke his neck and died several days later. Riots, protests, but more importantly, over the next 2 years, there was this huge increase in crime in disadvantaged areas in Baltimore, but also a huge increase in calls to 911 or 999, the equivalent, and huge drop in clearance rates, the detection rates, as we call them in the UK, so that the long-term effects of that single incident of police killing somebody who is seen as disadvantaged, to identify with the disadvantaged neighborhoods, we understand a lot more about the loss of legitimacy in specific communities that feel that they are being disadvantaged by police conduct. But it could be applied as well to London, where we have somebody who represents a white majority, Sarah Everard, getting killed by the police, which has been followed by a 60% drop in applications to the Met. These single event approaches, single event occasions have had devastating effects on police legitimacy, and we try certainly very hard to prevent them, but we also need to think more about how you can rebuild trust and legitimacy in the aftermath of those disasters. So these are questions that won't go away. We've got to deal with them, and I think we can. But these people have helped us to identify a lot of the key variables that we can use to restore the trust and legitimacy the police had 50 years ago. And in fact, all of government had 50 years ago. We've all been going downhill since then. One thing that Gary LaFree said that was really important is the quest for personal contact. And it suggests to me that when people call the police, if they can't speak to somebody right away who will help them, that they will be less likely to trust the police and have confidence in them. I think we're now moving to a technology in which police might provide most of the conversations they have with people on a video with a uniformed officer who they can see and talk to. And that's just like having somebody show up, except that when we try to send people in many of the forces in the UK, it can take days. And that's what perhaps part of the problem of trust and confidence in the police. They need to have, the people who want help from the police need to have that personal contact, and they need it now when they want it. And that's why I think these experiments in video response, including the ones just been completed in Dorset, which was just as successful as the 2 experiments in Kent. We now have 3 very strong randomized trials showing that people's trust and confidence in the police go up if they don't send a police car, but they have an immediate conversation by video with a uniformed officer.
And for the practitioner, for the police officer in any force, in any country, what are some practical, very hands-on things that they can do to improve their literacy in the everyday policing activities?
I think the fundamental procedural justice points about making people feel valued, so that police officers not only sort of flatly polite, but warmly polite. Tom Tyler talked about an Australian police force that always tries to say something positive when they're about to separate from a citizen they've been talking to. So they might thank them for wearing their seatbelt, or thank them for being cooperative in the encounter, or even say that's a very nice colored car you have. But anything positive can help to overcome the negatives of having an experience with police.
And what are we still going to hear for this afternoon in the conference? What can we look forward to?
Yeah, this afternoon we're going to dig right into this question of how do we actually measure procedural justice in a way that's fair and consistent. If we have different raters of police interaction with citizens coming up with different procedural justice scores,
and we just carry on.
right. The measurement of procedural justice is very complicated because of these 4 pillars that different people who watch a police video encounter with a citizen. They code different values, different scores. And we have a number of these studies now been done at Cambridge that show high variance and inconsistent inter-rater reliability, so that 2 or 3 sergeants looking at the same police officer in the same encounter may come up with different ratings. And so we're going to have to get around that. But first we have to establish that we've got a problem, and that's what's going to be shown this afternoon in 4 different studies.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, and we'll be watching the rest of the program very closely.
Thank you. Now, do you know if today is going to be posted online?
I think they will be posting things online. You've got the microphone.
Okay,
So,
at the Society for Evidence-Based